the weekly show with David J. Maloney. This week, David chats with Steve Luongo of the John Entwistle Band. And now, here's your host, David J. Maloney.
Welcome, everyone, to the weekly show. I'm your host, David J. Maloney. On tonight's show, we've got the next part of my interview with drummer Steve Luongo. Steve rose to fame with his first band, Rat Race Choir, and would go on to become one of the pioneers of the electronic percussion movement in the 1970s and 80s. As a friend, band member, and longtime collaborator of John Entwistle and the John Entwistle Band, he is continuing the legacy of John's music with the release of two incredible reissues, Ox-Humeds Volume 1 and Volume 2. Back again after the break is none other than drummer Steve Luongo. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. If I'm not mistaken, I think, was it Bogeyman from Ox-Humeds Volume 1 was one of the first songs that kind of broke into the light almost by accident. What's the story there?
Absolutely by accident. As I said, we all came into the studio with our tapes and our demos and this and that, and he had a cassette of that song, and it was drums and bass and him singing. There was nothing else on it. It was just basic tracks, and it was perfect. I mean, it was about the boogeyman, which in England is the bogeyman. So perfect for a kids show about vampire. Just the lyrics, everything was perfect, and we're listening to the track. John and I are listening to the demo, and I said, "Why didn't the Who ever do this?" And he said, "They thought it was too funny or too whimsical, or so they didn't want to do it." And I said, "Well, it's great." I said, "Who's that playing drums?" And he said, "I don't know." And I said, "Sounds like Keith Moon." And he goes, "Oh yeah, it's him." I said, "Well, John, how can we not use this, man? Let's, get the multi-track, the 2-inch tape, get the multi-track, and we'll overdub and finish the song. Put the guitars on it, the keyboards on it, the rest of the vocals. I'll play some percussion, and we'll finish it up." So he said, "Okay," and John had a tape room, which is the size of most people's bedrooms, and it was nothing but Who tapes or Entwistle tapes or whatever he had done over the years, and mostly 2-inch masters. And he called me up and he said, "I was looking for this tape for an hour and a half. I couldn't find it." And I said, "I'm getting frustrated." And I start to walk out of the room, and all of a sudden I hear bang. And he said, and I turn around, and there's the tape. It had been labeled on the wrong side, and it fell over like, "Don't you dare leave without this tape." And he said, "It was real spooky, man." And I said, "Yeah, okay." And to be able to play on a track with Keith Moon, for me, was like, I'm another drummer, and I didn't get to really play drums on it, but I played all the percussion and I arranged the parts, and it was just amazing. And he finds this tape, and when we went back to England to finish the record, we finished that song, and it was amazing to have Keith Moon, all those years ago from the 70s playing on a record that was released in the 90s.
We had Andy Timmons on not too long ago, and it was we kind of likened something like that to stumbling upon something in an archaeological dig. Right,
Ox-Humeds.
Yeah, exactly.
And Andy did a track for me at Warner Brothers, oddly enough, a song that I had demoed for Eric Clapton. Eric never did it, but he got the demo. But Andy what a fantastic guitar player he was, and just the solos. It was a song called "Vieux Carré," a sort of a New Orleans kind of Zydeco type of thing, but a little bluesy. And Bobby Pridden was good friends with Clapton, and I said, "Man, you got to send this to Eric for me and see if he's interested." And it never happened, but when you mentioned Andy Timmons, the first thing that came to my mind was the brilliant guitar work that he did on that demo. He's a great guy. I've jammed with him several times in New York, and what a fantastic talent he is.
So we were talking a little about Ox-Humeds Volume 2, which really just goes to show how much material there was to work with. What of this new volume do you think John would be most proud of or most excited by?
Well, I think he would be proud of the fact that we did a lot of his benchmark songs. Whiskey Man, which was the first song he ever wrote, and Had Enough, which in my opinion is my favorite song that he ever wrote. There's a version of Boris on there that actually Keith Emerson arranged the middle part of it. There's that whole orchestration in the middle. And I think he would be proud of the work as a whole because it showcased so many different parts of Entwistle. And the one thing that I think, if he was here, we did Long Live Rock on that. There's a version of Long Live Rock, and that was never in our playlist. It's not something that we ever rehearsed. It's not something, at sound check, we might, somebody might have been playing the fill, the riff or whatever, but we never did it, and our band was so comfortable that we'd be talking back and forth on stage, making jokes. And if you listen, I left a lot of that stuff in the beginning of the live tracks, like the Boris Blues thing. There's are we doing the Boris Blues tonight? And we just joke around with that. And I think it was the guitar player starts playing the riff to Long Live Rock. And then the keyboard player comes in and he's playing the riff with it. We're just noodling around on stage between songs. And I looked over at John and went, want to do this? And he went, okay. And then we launch into Long Live Rock. And that's not one that we rehearsed. It's not one that we did more than a handful of times over the years. But that was the band. That was indicative of what we did. It was anything goes, let's go.
And right in the moment, clicked.
Yeah. And the same thing happened with Sparks and that whole Tommy thing. He knew how it went and we knew how it went and we just found our way through it and it worked its way into the set and just by happenstance. And I think, he loved playing bass guitar. And in all of those songs, he really gets to play. And the fact that we stuck the Eminence front thing at the end of the Tommy thing, it's just, that was the personality of the band. Anything goes. Start doing it, let's go. We start laughing, we laugh. If we start crying, we cry. And it was so liberating. I've never been in a more spontaneous situation musically that clicked so well. It was brilliant. It was just brilliant.
Is there an idea or specific addition that you made that you feel John would have very specifically loved?
I think, the hardest part of doing both of these volumes was doing them without John. Yeah. Because I have to put myself in his spot. And, I think, what was there's, I wish
and
I had
think
it.
Like him too.
Well, yeah. And know what he would say. And there's in Whiskey Man, John was 50 some odd years old, way too many cigarettes and shots of brandy. And his voice was not what it once was back in the 70s. And I said, we really have to do some of your stuff. We've got to do Boris. We have to do My Wife. We have to do your classic songs. Had Enough, Roger sang, so that Godfrey got to sing that. And I would double him on Trick of the Light or whatever, songs like that. But Whiskey Man, and Love is a Heart Attack, which we haven't even used it yet. He sang them exclusively, Success Story and so on and so forth. And I used to say, are you all right with this? Because we're recording this. And he said, they're not coming to hear me sing. So I said, you know what? He would rather hit a couple of rough vocal notes as a trade-off to the brilliant guitar, bass guitar that he was playing on these tracks than to scrap a beautiful version because he didn't hit every one of the notes. We know he can sing the songs. Now listen to him play them. So it was... that was a rough decision for me because I would come across, don't forget, I had to listen to 20, 30 different versions of a song before I found the one that ticked the most boxes. And there was never a perfect track. There was, the one that had the greatest good in it. So for instance, Had Enough. And the one thing that I didn't do, and I should tell you this, there's no overdubs, there's no fixes, nothing was repaired on the live tracks. The studio was the studio, and that's, comes along with all the studio magic. But the live tracks, that's just what it was. It's, there were no fixes, no extra vocals, no no repairs of any kind. I wanted it to be as if you were coming to see the band live. And I think what he would have liked was the fun of the band. I mean, yes, I can go into all the furious, live at Leeds stuff, the Young Man Blues and so on and so forth, and Shaken All Over from Volume 1. But I think he would have liked the impromptu-ness of it, the way we joked around, are we doing the Boris Blues? And he would say, had enough, not to be confused with the same song with another, whatever we said. And, that was fun for us. I mean, we used to like joking around on stage, and the banter on stage evolved over the years. There would be like little inside jokes in the band. When he would introduce the guitar player, Godfrey Townsend, no H, no relation, he would say on the guitar, Godfrey Townsend, no H, no relation, no nose, no Ferrari. And it was just, it was fun, man. I mean, it was like being in a band when you were a kid, only we're in our 40s and 50s, and you're still doing it. Somebody asked me once, what's it like to do what you do? Because it's the only thing I've ever done. I've never had a regular job. I've always been in a rock band. And I used to try to come up with this amazing answer. Oh, it's like this, it's like that. And I finally said, remember when you were a kid, it was Saturday off from school, springtime, and you rode your bicycle around all day till the sun went down and you barely made it home for dinner? Imagine when you walked in the door, someone handed you $1,000 and said, make sure you do that again tomorrow. That's what it's like to do what I do. And it's pure joy with a payday. Whoops.
Well, there you have it. I did want to ask you one thing. Going through this stuff, while you're going through it, given the closeness that you ended up having with John, was it emotionally trying at times, or was it the exact opposite, where it brought you joy because it brought him kind of back? You know how sometimes it makes you feel like the person's still around, right? A little bit.
Well, yes, and the reason that it would feel that way is there were months of time where I wouldn't see John. We would talk almost every day, but he was in England, I was in the States. He would be touring with The Who, I'd be touring with Leslie or whatever. But there was always that contact. So if a few days went by and he wasn't there, it was understood. I mean, it's just the way it was. But there were many times where I would walk out of the studio and I'd not even realize that I had tears running down my face and my face covered with tissues. And my wife would say something to the effect of, found a good track, did you? And the thing about it, the thing that when I'm listening to these tracks, especially the live tracks, Young Man Blues, Summertime Blues, and the Tommy stuff, and Shaken All Over, I can feel my shoulders firing like I'm playing the songs, and I can feel the impulse of what it was like, and just even describing that to you now, I'm getting a chill up my back, and I'm kind of getting that goosey feeling, and I couldn't have done this 10 years ago. I just couldn't have brought myself to do it. It was too painful, and this just seemed right, and it did come with a certain amount of pain, but it came with a lot of satisfaction because I know, we did this.
And it's something that obviously you're very, very proud. It was a labor of love, obviously.
Way big love, man. I mean, big love. And, John, that's the last thing he ever said to me was, love you, mate. And John was not that hearts and flowers kind of, he wasn't, that's not who he was. I mean, if we were drunk or something, it would turn into that sloppy romance. But I remember he was leaving for Vegas, and he was still in England, and he was getting ready to go to the airport, and he rang me up, and we talked for a few minutes. And I said, I'll be, because I was doing business for us. We were in a business partnership, so I was doing things for us while he was out, or should have been out, doing that tour in '02. And that's the last thing he said, love you, mate. And it was like, wow. Done.
And you got that. I mean, a lot of times people don't get that, right? So
Yeah, and especially at that time in your life, man. I mean, when you're kids, you're kids and everything's all good. But when you're in your 50s and 40s and late 40s and 50s, John was 8 years older than me, so he died at 57. So I was in my late 40s. To have that kind of a friend, that kind of a mentor, and a brother, and a partner, and just a real friend, it was a gift beyond words. It took me a lot of years to be able to come to grips with the fact that it had ended. But after a while, I was able to kind of find the poetry in that sort of, and when I had the opportunity to do Ox-Hummed, it seemed like right time, right place, right time. And I don't know if you've ever seen the documentary Ox's Tale. An Ox's Tale, which is the John Entwistle story, was a documentary that I started making about John getting back together with the Who, the process of, gearing up and what are we going to play and what are we going to use and wardrobe. And I thought it would be an interesting just companion piece. And they were going to let us have it in the merchandise on the Who tour. And obviously it didn't happen because we were never able to finish it. And years later, I finished it posthumously, but it was John who named it when I was editing in Burbank. And he said, "How's it going?" I said, "It's going really good." I said, "Do you have a name?" And he said, "An Ox's Tale, Tale." Right? It was like, come on, how do you do that, man?
you just boom, had it.
And so unfortunately, the financing for it dried up, and we were never able to get it on that particular Who tour, which I think was '98 or '90. I don't remember what year, but and then obviously he passed in '02, and it never was completed to the point where where it was commercialized. And then years later, someone came to me and said, "I heard that these tapes exist, and I'm wondering if you want to finish it." And I said, "Well, okay, let me think about that." And it was tough because the first person I reached out to was Townsend. And I said, "Man, I'm doing this thing, blah, blah, blah." And I started it with John, and I told him the story. And he said, "Yeah, mate, come on over on, and we'll sit and we'll talk." I hired a crew in England. I flew over to London. I met Pete at the studio. And Pete's I don't want to undercut the seriousness of Townsend. He is Pete Townsend, and he is everything that you've ever heard and more, including a very nice person, if that's the way it goes for you. But I wasn't expecting, I was expecting maybe 12, 15 minutes of, yeah, we met here and we did this and blah, blah, blah. We sat for 3.5 hours on film, just talking back and forth about John and the Who and how they did certain things. And, I asked him about my generation. I said, John told me that you always brought in your demos, they were complete demos. Did you have the bass solo on My Generation? He said, "Oh yeah, it was a cruddy old bass solo." He said, "I just indicated where I wanted John to play, but he had planned that out on the demo." He said, "I just played digga 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 bam bam bam," and it was just like, I don't know, I guess it was like ex-wives talking about their late husband. It was incredible, and he was just amazingly forthcoming. And yeah, I mean, 3.5 hours of just chatting up about the Who and music in general, and them as kids at Acton County Grammar School. Amazing. And so then obviously Chris Squire did it. Roger didn't want to do it because he said, "I'm tired of talking about John Entwistle." But there's a lot of great people in that film. And I've just been incredibly blessed with the legacy, or my portion of the legacy of John Entwistle. You can't make this stuff up, man.
And now we've got these 2 volumes to savor. What's next for you, Steve? Is there more in the treasure trove? What's next on tap?
One of the things that I did while I was, gleaning all this material is I took all of the banter on stage. I remember we were doing Trick of the Light once, and we were in Reno, Nevada, and we were recording live, and he played a wrong note or whatever it was, and I just stopped the band. I said, "Come on, stop." And he said, "What? What?" And I said, "Well, we're recording, man. You know." And he said into the mic, "If we stopped a song every time I hit a wrong note, we'd be playing in effing Morse code." And it was just like, who says that kind of stuff on stage? It was just brilliant. So there was so much of that, so many funny things. And then I'd goose up the volume so you could hear what we were saying. And I have like an hour or an hour and a half's worth of just that. And I said, boy, if I could figure out a way to make a song or a recording out of this. And there's tons of stuff. I mean, there's hundreds of shows. I mean, we recorded every night for years. And there's a couple of, like I said, I have hours of his demos, things that he did. Never say never. It's got to be right. I have to be in the right place and the right frame of mind, and I have to feel like Johnny's on my shoulder saying, "Yeah, go ahead, do that." But I think he would have been very proud of what we did. Not easy to get out from underneath the shadow of the Who. That's the Who. That's one of the all-time British invasion, earth-crushing bands. How do you, and we never were competing with that. It was never about that. It was, we can do this too, so let's do this, and we did. And I think he would be most proud of the fact that we just actually went out and did that. And it was glorious, man.
Well, where should our audience go to follow y'all on various social media platforms? What do you got going on?
Well, you can always catch me on Facebook, Steve Luongo for real, or my website is just my name, steveluongo.com. There's always new stuff coming up there. My manager is booking a lecture tour for me. I put a trio together with some killer players, so I'll be out telling the stories and playing the music on a sort of a lecture type of thing at colleges and theaters and stuff. So that's out there. So look for that, but that'll be on Facebook, and I think Instagram is @DrumCrusher, and same for X or Twitter. And it's, as far as the music is concerned, you can find it all on all of the streaming platforms, Spotify, Apple, iTunes. It's everywhere, not hard to find. And if you want to actually buy a physical copy, which has some really cool artwork and a lot of storytelling in there, you can get that at Amazon. And we, as far as I know, last week were number 8 on physical sales at Amazon. So very proud of that. And Ox-Hummed, back when we first released it, reached number 1. And I think he would just be over the top about that. So,
well, that's awesome, Steve. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
The pleasure was mine, David. Let's do it anytime you want. There's nothing I'd rather do than spill the beans on the greatest bass guitarist of all time.
Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Luongo. That's our show for tonight. Thank you so much for watching, and a special thanks to Steve Luongo for joining us once again. Stay safe, everyone.